What was it that finally exposed the commander of one of Russia's most secretive assassination units, Unit 29155? Not a spy defecting, not a secret document leak, not even an intercepted phone call. It was a wedding photo from his daughter's wedding at a lakeside hotel venue in Russia. Photos posted online by wedding guests and vendors finally helped us to identify the man in command of Unit 29155, General Andrey Averyanov. In videos posted by the wedding organizers, boasting about this beautiful wedding, we watched as the GRU general proudly walked his daughter down the aisle, dressed in a gray suit and a bow tie. And seated nearby was a man whose face we already knew, Anatoly Chepiga, the man who had poisoned Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. It was like a scene straight out of The Godfather, a killer and his deadly minions smiling and drinking and gathering at a family wedding. All of them pretending that they don't spend their days plotting deadly attacks on the Kremlin's targets. For my team at Bellingcat, where we were rigorously investigating this very unit, it was this wedding gathering, first reported by the New York Times in October 2019, that cracked the door to Unit 29155 open even further. We had been on their trail, particularly after the Salisbury poisonings, but this moment and the foundational revelations from the New York Times connected several critical details that changed our understanding of the organization forever. Hi, I'm Christo Grozev, an investigative journalist. Welcome to the third episode of our series on Unit 29155, the GRU's division that specializes in assassinations, sabotage, and political influence missions abroad. In our last two episodes, we identified the operatives behind two of the most brazen GRU assassination attempts in recent history, the Salisbury poisonings of Sergei Skripal and the attempted murder of Bulgarian arms dealer Emilian Gebrev. In those episodes, we explained how we tracked the agents responsible and discovered their true identities. If you haven't watched them, I suggest you go back and start there. Both of those investigations were critical in helping us uncover the truth about Unit 29155. But throughout both investigations, we weren't really clear on who exactly they were working for. We knew they were GRU, the Russian military intelligence agency, but what department they sat in was not very clear. We didn't know who the commander was, their explicit mandate, or the size of the team. So this episode is going to look a bit different as we introduce you to the commander of Unit 29155, General Andrey Averyanov, and explained how we connected him to this deadly unit. As is likely already clear to you, many of our big findings stem from being able to identify the members of the unit and then retroactively connect them to past events. So uncovering Andrey Averyanov's name, face, and role within the unit was a massive breakthrough for us. In the article, they finally put a name to the secretive group within the GRU, Unit 29155. It was the first time we had a name for the unit and a confirmation of their explicitly destructive objectives. They also identified its commander, General Andrey Averyanov, 53 at the time that the New York Times published. The New York Times had been given photos of him from his daughter's wedding in 2017, explaining that among the guests was Anatoly Chepiga, the same man that we had identified as one of the agents behind the Skripal poisoning in 2018. We at Bellingcat specialize in open source investigations, so we were absolutely determined to see those photographs for ourselves, discover them on our own, and validate these findings. Before we get to the photographs though, let's discuss the broader discovery of Unit 29155 and the identification of its commander, Andrey Averyanov. By the time of the New York Times piece, many of us pursuing these investigations had already started to notice a consistent detail in our research. Many of the Russian agents we were discovering in our investigations were connected to the same address in Moscow, Khrushchevskoye Chaussee 76B, the official headquarters of the GRU. This address turned up in residency files, passport applications, and car registrations. Again and again, agents with connections to field operations, or men who we suspected could be agents, were showing up as registered at this address somewhere in their lives. Some of them we already knew, like Chepiga, Mishkin, and Denis Sergeyev. But it also helped us to validate the GRU ties of other suspects. If we found that somebody was registered in a database to this specific address, it was one initial way of validating that they worked at some point in their life with the GRU. Once we started looking at this pattern, we found more than 20 officers tied to that same address. We could see that many held the rank of colonel or lieutenant colonel. And there was one general, Andrey Averyanov, the same general that the New York Times piece had suggested was the commander of Unit 29155. Leaked residency data placed him registered to Horoshovskoye Chaussee 76B as far back as 2010. That aligned perfectly with our roster of other known Unit 29155 officers. It also aligned well with the unit's general timeline, which we would come to uncover later in publicly accessible Russian records. The corporate records show that Averyanov became the commander of the newly reconstituted Unit 29155 following a 2008 purge and the modernization of Russia's armed forces just after the end of the Russian-Georgian War. Averyanov was recruited to helm the team of about 60 men, made of mostly young operatives from the GRU and Russian Spetsnaz Special Forces units for offensive sabotage operations abroad. We cross-referenced our investigations about Russian agents or suspected saboteurs with the Horoshovskoye Chaussee address and began to build out the list of names we suspected were part of Unit 29155. On that roster, we discovered explosive specialists, later linked to weapons depot attacks in Bulgaria and the Czech Republic. Medical doctors like Alexander Mishkin and his colleagues used in poisoning operations. Signal and communications officers coordinated encrypted communications and hacking operations during active missions. It was a deep bench of deadly skill sets. Many of the agents had served in Chechnya or Ukraine. Most had received high state honors like Hero of Russia. They rarely had any public profiles or social media presence. And almost all used cover identities created using subtle patterns we had seen before: recycled birth dates, sequential passport numbers, stripped early life ID records. The revelations from the New York Times had helped us make sense of the agents we were already uncovering. It wasn't a random collection of operatives. This was a military unit with its own rules, objectives, structure, and command. And now we had a picture of their commander, Andrey Averyanov. The photo from Averyanov's face that was shown in the New York Times publication was captioned as from his daughter's 2017 wedding in Russia. Our team at Bellingcat at the time, made up of experts in social media sleuthing, was confident that there were more photo content pieces out there. After all, it's a 21st century wedding. And luckily for us, they were right. For her big day, Averyanov's daughter had hired a professional videographer to capture the weekend's events, a common desire for modern couples. Even better, the final wedding video was later uploaded to two public YouTube accounts, one belonging to Averyanov's son-in-law and the other belonging to an employee of the lakeside hotel venue where the wedding was held. The ceremony took place outdoors, on a wooden dock by a calm lake. Guests in summer dress, a relaxed but formal setting. Chepiga appears in the video, but only fleetingly, just fragments, the side of his head, brief glances, partial profiles, enough to raise suspicions that it was him, but not enough to confirm as we were trying to do. Unsurprisingly, the family made the video private shortly after the New York Times report, but by then we had already archived it. Still, we needed better visuals, and we, alongside our journalists at Radio Svoboda, found them. The wedding had been organized by a planning company, Zvonova Weddings, which had posted a detailed event gallery on its own website. There we found multiple high-resolution photographs showing Chepiga at different moments during the day, images of his family, who also appeared at the wedding, and a photo of a table seating chart, which in many ways was the Holy Grail. It had the names of attendees listed, as well as how they were seated in relation to one another, almost like a map of hierarchy trying to help us understand the closeness of the guests to the key people. Chepiga himself was not listed under his real name on the seating chart. Instead, there was a seat reserved for Alexei Chepiga, but the rest of his family was also in attendance using their real full names. His child is even seen participating in the ceremony in some of the photos. These weren't casual acquaintances, this was an inner circle with access to the general. We colorized one of the black and white photo shots to sharpen the contrast, and then compared it to our surveillance and passport images of the so-called Ruslan Boshirov, Chepiga's cover identity for the Salisbury poisonings. The match was irrefutable. Hairline, facial hair pattern, distinctive mole above the right eyebrow, earlobes, wrinkles on the corners of the eyes, all aligned perfectly. This was Anatoly Chepiga. All of these findings made Chepiga's cover story for Salisbury, that he was a sports nutrition salesman, even more laughable than it was before. The photos had helped us place a face with Andrey Averyanov's name, and the New York Times reporting gave us a name for the unit we had been unmasking through our investigations. It was called Unit 29155. Now we knew its address, its commander, and many of its soldiers. And we also knew that it was the dark force behind sabotage, poisonings, and targeted attacks across Europe. Slowly, the veil was coming off. And at least for Averyanov, his role was only going to grow. If you've seen our episode on the bounty program in Afghanistan, where the Russians paid the Taliban to kill American and Allied soldiers, you will be familiar with how Averyanov has continued to grow in his influence. Even more so, today he has inherited a sizable chunk of the empire that until recently belonged to Yevgeny Prigozhin, the former Wagner mercenary chief whose private jet was blown up in August 2023 following his own failed insurrection in Russia. But while he gets more and more influence, we won't stop following him and documenting the crimes he's responsible for. In our next episode, we will explain how these discoveries about Unit 29155 and its members led to a new set of revelations about their deadly activities. We will take you to Vrbice in Czech Republic, where in 2014 a massive explosion ripped through the arms depot there. At the time, no one knew who was behind it, but armed with new information, we went back in time and took another look. And suddenly, everything made sense. Unit 29155 was behind a series of bombings in NATO territories, targeting munitions bound for Russia's enemies. Subscribe to the Christo Files so you don't miss the episode or the rest of our series on Unit 29155. Thanks for watching.